Right, good evening everybody, and thanks for coming this evening to our ONS Scrutiny meeting. Can I have apologies for absence, please, Spencer?
Yes, we've had apologies from councillors Herdman, Wilkins and Sims.
Thank you. Do I have any declarations of interest? No. Any minutes? Sorry, the minutes of the previous meeting. Everybody happy with those? A true and accurate record? Can I have a show of hands? Well, I need an approver first, actually. Yeah, perfect. And the second, and then I'll approve. Show of hands, unanimous. Thank you. Any questions from members of the public, Spencer?
No questions, Chair.
No, thank you. Well, before I move on, I would also like to say thank you to Beverly Hardman and Councillor Rowley for joining us this evening. So it's nice to see members of the council that aren't on ONS, so thank you for joining us, and members of the executive by that point as well that come to.
Can we also say she was the only one, Chairman?
She is. I think it's quite obvious that she's the only one, but we can say that, yes. So next item then is littering and fly tipping in Wychavon. We've got Tim who is joining us. Tim, I don't know if you wanted to speak to anything before we start the conversation, or...
No, I'm happy to discuss it, Chair.
I just wonder whether, because you're relatively recent imposed and by Wychavon standards still embryonic really in terms of officers, given how long some people have been here. So just whether you'd be happy maybe just to sum up your role and sort of responsibilities. I just think that might be a helpful framing for the conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my official title is Head of Client Services. So I oversee the contracts for waste, recycling, street cleansing, parks, open spaces and public toilets, and anything that falls into those categories. That is my responsibility.
Thank you. So I'm happy to open it up to the committee. Before I do that, the reason why we're discussing it tonight is that certainly as a ward member, I know that this has become something that's filled my inbox regularly, especially over the last sort of the summer period and in the last year. I had hoped that we'd get representation this evening from some of the bodies that, in their own time, of which we're very grateful to, go out and litter pick to keep our community and streets and green spaces looking as clean as they do. And from, Anti-Litter Evesham and Laura Van Troller doing an incredible job weekend in and out to make sure that they do that. But from reading the papers that I've seen and the stuff that's come back, it's obvious that also happens in Droitwich, in Crowell and in and Pershore as well. There aren't those people here, so I've asked the committee as well when they are talking that they just sort of frame the position that they're talking from, and that might be that we have some representation from on the committee of people that do sit in some of those groups. It might be as a ward member, it might be as a town councillor. I just think that might be helpful, just that when we have that conversation. Mindful that we don't want it to become too colloquial, but unfortunately littering is one of those issues that we see and observe in our area that we live, work and represent. So it will come out, I guess. But keen to have a good conversation about this and see what are the themes that come out of that and what we might want to put forward and recommend to executive in terms of some actions. So I'll open it up to the committee. Who would like to go first? Councillor Catworthy.
Really, it's to Tim. People may or may not know, I live in a private group of flats, and we have a collective bin store, which we have our own security to. We had an awful lot of problems with it through Tim's efforts and the management company. We've now changed the bins, things are settling down, collections are happening and everything else. And because the residents know that I'm a part of this group and you were going to be here tonight, they've asked me through this committee to pass on their grateful thanks for everything that you have done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Clatworthy. Anyone else wishing to speak on this? Councillor Tucker.
Yes, and I would be speaking, well, I am speaking as the chair of Evesham Anti-Litter Group. The Anti-Litter Group has been active since 2017 and has been doing litter picking, not just at weekends, but every day, in actual fact. some people have been going out and doing that, and they've also been holding public meetings and going into schools and doing all sorts of things to try and reduce the amount of litter that we see around Evesham. And there are quite a lot of spots around Evesham where you get, they're quite often in alleyways off the main streets, where you get lots of litter and fly tipping going on. And one of the things we've championed is the use of the report it function. And I think that's used a lot now, isn't it? But my specific point, I mean, there's lots of things that I could mention about litter, but my specific point is that I know FCC goes around and does street cleansing in the town centre areas daily, but I know more or less the rest of the suburbs are looked at and monitored, or supposedly monitored, by FCC. I would like to know how we check on whether they are monitoring, because I see an awful lot of litter in those other streets. Thank you.
No, I think that's a fair comment. I think, so in terms of monitoring, the recent contract, so since the contract changed in 2018, is heavily a reactive contract. So what they refer to as output-based. So in terms of the monitoring, the heavy KPIs, so the key performance indicators, are based on the reactive nature of reports are received, and then they are reacted to within a certain time frame, rather than the schedule based, which it used to be previously in 2008, prior to 2018 in the old contract. So the majority of stuff is, with the way we monitor the contract, is based on reaction to the requests that we get raised. So the complaints that get raised, are they responded to within a timely manner? And that is the way the current contract is written.
Right, so there's no checking of suburbs at all then, other than what is reported?
We have officers who are out and about at all times. We have our parks officers and we have our streets and amenities officer who conduct assessments of the roads as they go past, and they'll report back anything if it's required. But that's the monitoring that we currently do.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just so I understand? So obviously there's parts of all the towns and that will be on a regular routine, so they're done. I think what Councillor Tugger was referring to is, so for instance, the town centre's done daily. I think I'm not sure if it's done on a Sunday, but pretty much. So every single day, it's then those bits that fall outside of that. So the sort of the Bridge Street, for example, or Port Street, they fall under some routine. And I guess, and the question maybe if you could come back, and I don't expect you to know the answer now, but if you could come back and tell us what that routine is. So does that, but equally, what if there is that routine? How are we monitoring that it's being done, rather than waiting for someone to tell us that there's an issue? If we know that Port Street is cleansed every 2 weeks, how often do we go out and just do a spot check after we've been told they've been there to say we think that was to a satisfactory level? I don't know if that, maybe I'm paraphrasing incorrectly, Councillor Tucker.
Well, it's partially that, but it is also the suburb. I'm thinking of, for example, Davis Road. People go along there out to the anti-litter group, and they pick it every day, and you can get 1 or 2 bags of rubbish. So, you know, I'm a bit concerned that we're only reacting so when somebody reports some litter, because for example, these grot spots, a lot of people aren't going to go up these lanes and they're not going to see it. It's only when somebody's out there looking and then they find loads of stuff. Yeah,
so I think that's separate. For me, it's a differentiation from if Davis Road is on a routine that we say that once a month or whatever that is, that it's cleansed. If not, then not Davis Road, but a road that is not something that's done on a daily basis, but a more infrequent basis. What's done to police that? Because I don't think, Tim, you were saying basically that's done on a reactive. But there are obviously a much wider network of routine cleansing activity that goes on over and above the daily cleansing of the high street and stuff like that.
Absolutely, there is a schedules of cleansing, and they are routined, and I can share the zones with people after the event to advise what the zonings are in the various areas, if that would be helpful.
Councillor
Just
Tucker.
say, I thought the zones were, you've got zone 1, which are the important streets in a town, whichever town, and Broadway as well, and then you've got zones 2 and 3 are villages that are picked every month or 2 months or whatever. Is there something in between that you've got in the towns?
There are some areas in the towns which would be considered zone 2s, so it's not just limited to villages.
Right.
So I think that kind of information would be really useful to be able to share with you.
Yeah, that sounds
That
really
would be,
helpful.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Charles Tucker, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Dye.
Thank you. Yes, when you said that your only monitoring was on the responsive and how quickly people responded, how quickly FCC or whoever the contractor was responded to a complaint, I was beginning to think that you were not doing the routine everyday work. No, that's still going on. That's good. But can I ask about how you? Obviously, you're sweeping streets. What about footways? Now, does that get done as part of the street sweep, or is it done separately and on a different frequency? I mean, I can highlight, particularly, I'm Pershore councillor. I can highlight Bridge Street in Pershore, where there's a lot of vegetation growing along at the junction between the properties and the pavement, and in the pavement as well. I know you did quite a lot of work during the summer on greenery in the town, but there's a lot come back since. I know there's a particular issue there because there's continually a row of parked cars on that side of the street, the west side of the street or the south side of the street, whichever, you know what I mean. So how do we deal with the footway issues?
So there are separate schedules for both footways and roadways. They are considered separate, and we have different zonings for those as well. And again, I can happily share those after the event. So we have path sweepers as well as we have one path sweeper as well as a road sweeper. So the path sweepers would attend to those and manually as well.
Right. But are they able to
Use your microphone, Charles.
Are they able to deal with greenery?
So we currently are attending to greenery in 2 ways. So we have manual removal by FCC, and then we also have another subcontractor who would attend with. The word fails me now.
Rakes?
Just manual removal.
Manual removal.
Yeah, manual removal, and also we have the herbicide which are used on the streets.
Herbicide. Well, obviously, we're trying to get away from herbicide as much as possible, aren't we?
We are, but obviously, and we obviously don't have. We're not using them in our parks and open spaces, but they're still being used on the highways.
Right. Okay. But it would be useful to know exactly where you are doing that footway cleansing.
Thanks, Councillor Dyke.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Certainly before you were in post, Tim, it could be a month, a year or so ago, maybe a bit longer, I and Emma Stokes and the chap from FCC, and there was somebody else there as well, we walked up Bridge Street and we were told by FCC that they are supposed to clean that every morning. Well, they certainly hadn't cleaned it that morning. Having said that, the biggest problem is cigarette butts. Now, I don't know whether you have to include that separately as being rubbish or litter or whatever you want to call it, but it builds up and builds up and builds up. And then you get this green sludge around the bins and stuff like that. Sorry to be so graphic, but that is Bridge Street in Evesham right now. So I don't know how you would, the chairman talked about somebody going and having a look and making sure what they've done is what they've done, what they're supposed to do. How would you handle that situation? You don't want a phone call every 5 minutes from me or anybody else saying they haven't been today. So what would you do to make sure they do what they are supposed to do every day?
So I think I know what you're referring to. And I think in light of that, initially we had our Streets and Amenities officer going out and double checking with their supervisor as well to make sure that obviously the area had been attended to. And I think over the last kind of 6 months, that after it was decided that the areas were looking satisfactory, I think that has then slipped away, so that is no longer being taken place. So I think maybe potentially that's something we need to look at trying to reintroduce.
Councillor Crump.
Thank you. I've got a couple of things. First of all, just going on the path cleaning, footpath cleaning. In Pershore, it used to be sort of an annual thing to clean the footpaths, and it always used to happen just before Carnival. It wasn't, well, I didn't notice that it happened this year, and just wondered why that was the case. I know I've got a shop in the high street, and it was all sort of like quite funny to us because they clean all of them with the jet wash, and it all goes up all our windows, and it's usually we've cleaned the windows the day before, sod's law, but that's fine. But it didn't happen this year, and I know we've had people that have said to us that, you know, it's looking a lot more untidy at the moment than normal. So that was the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have deep cleanses, which they're referred to, which happen in the main town centres. And this year's deep cleanses have been delayed as a result of the resourcing issues, which we have had at FCC. And I think that's obviously been shared with councillors, what we're currently doing, using a third-party contractor to help support the street cleansing, which includes the deep cleanses, but they haven't been reinstated yet. So that's why it hasn't taken place yet.
Okay, thank you. Also, I'm putting my hat on for Pershore. I'm now Jodie. She was going to be here tonight, but unfortunately was unable to come. I know that she's been talking with you at some extent on quite a few different things. One of the things that she was saying about, we were talking about the fly tipping, reports of fly tipping. Now, you say you've given a number. Is that number, say, for example, it was in Fladbury? Is it 5 people talking about that Fladbury? Would that go to the list, or would it be just because it was just one particular fly tipping? Would that be, you know, cast as one? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And Jodie and I had this discussion last week, so I met with her and discussed it in great detail. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that we highlighted, which is something we need to address and something I've discussed with Rob Rich as well, who sadly couldn't be here tonight either, is about how do we make sure that it is just one report being reported on? Because at the minute, it is duplicate reports that will be considered in that number. And at the minute, the system is not clever enough, I think, for want of a better word, to differentiate between individual reports and multiple reports of the same fly tip, which obviously makes the data inaccurate, if we're being really honest. Yeah. So we would like to pursue something in line with what Worcestershire County Council have, where if you report a blocked drain or something that has already been reported, it will tell you that it's already been reported, or you can see where in the vicinity other issues have been reported. So longer term, that's obviously, it's all dependent on IT systems, etc. So it's not an overnight fix, but it's something longer term we would like to look at. But so to answer the question, yes, it includes duplicates in those figures.
Okay, thank you. Also, I've got a few here, sorry, Chair. When we're talking about the fly tipping, how many of the fly tipping have actually gone through to prosecution?
So obviously this would be for Rob Rich, but when I discussed with him, prosecutions for fly tipping in the last 12 months, there's been 0 for fly tipping.
And is there any way that we could sort of try and make examples of these situations when they're occurring and get some people that are fined and, you know, and publicise it more, so that try and as a deterrent for others, because they're just sort of thinking that, you know, they're not going to get caught?
Absolutely, and I think in general, and one of the points that was raised in the pre-notes was we don't advertise enough of what we do regarding fly tipping and preventative measures, etc., and that's something we need to address. And I know Ian Dipple and Rob are working on something at the moment to kind of advertise those facts, and including that kind of thing that we could advertise as well.
You're also using these cameras in certain points. Do you feel that this is helping the scenario, and are they being put in the right places, and do we need more of them? Sorry, a lot of questions all there, but yeah.
I'll try and answer each individual question. But we have 3 cameras in total, and I think there's 2 being used for, as far as I was advised by Rob, for serious organised crime prevention, and there's 1 which is a mobile camera which can be used elsewhere. So to answer your question about whether we have enough, that's questionable. Obviously, they're very expensive. But in terms of where we can locate them as well, one of the things that we've discussed is it's difficult to identify areas where they would be suitable for a number of reasons. But one would be we have to be conscious of the safety of putting them up in the areas that we want to put them up, in terms of the operatives who are kind of installing them, because there's a risk associated. We're putting them in areas where we know people fly tip, and there's a risk that they be identified, etc. Sorry, I've lost a list of the questions
That's
that
all right.
you might have asked. So repeat some of the questions.
I think that pretty covered most of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And also with regard to litter picking, it seems that it's more reactive than proactive. Have you got sort of plans to change this?
In an ideal world, yes. I think it is too reactive. We do proactive litter picking as well, as we've discussed. But a lot of the stuff that we do is reactive. In terms of what we make that change look like, I don't have an answer for you right now, but it is something we are looking at.
Yeah. One thing that was mentioned earlier by one of my colleagues was that when the mop comes to Evesham and how it's sort of cleaned up afterwards, in other events this doesn't happen and bins are left around for long periods of time. Is it something that we can try and make people who are doing these events more responsible? And, if you haven't got it cleared by a certain period of time, they're fined for it, and just, make it part of the contract of what they're trying to actually do. Do they do that already?
Make it a condition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you talk about the events that we have in our own area, parks and open spaces, or just in general, or?
These were when they were some of the ones you were saying in open spaces, weren't they? Yeah. So if it was, say, there was an event on Crown Meadow, that was one that was mentioned, and then the bins weren't emptied afterwards, or the area wasn't cleaned up afterwards by those particular organisers, maybe, they should be held more responsible for it and should be a condition of what they're doing.
No, absolutely, and I think it might be the Food and Drink Festival that you might be referring to, but there was a large amount of litter that was left outside of the bins after that event, and the organiser was charged for the clearance of that litter, and then it's been factored in for future events for that particular organiser to make sure when we review, if it's on our open spaces, we review how many bins they provide, because they have to pay for the bins as well, and they ensuring that they have provided enough bins for how many people are there. So that's part of our events procedure now.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm done. Sorry.
Yeah, just continuing on the fly tipping theme for a bit. There are some locations in Evesham which are so regularly fly tipped, it's almost just like a big public bin. And you walk along there one day and there's stuff like furniture and TVs and fridges and whatever. And then you walk past the next day and it's been cleared away. So somebody's obviously dealing with it. But the point is, it doesn't stay clean. It's there one day, then you go back, and then the next day there's a new set of tipping. I would have thought, that's the sort of place really where we ought to be focusing enforcement on, because people are getting used to putting stuff there. It's obviously not the same person over and over again. They don't have 100 fridges and 100 or maybe they do. Maybe they're doing that rather than taking them to the tip. But those are the locations, I think, that we need to be focusing enforcement action on, and catching the people who are putting those things there, because these are key thoroughfares in the town, key pedestrian routes, and it's not pleasant to keep walking past a fly-tipped fridge every other day.
No, and I think that's a fair comment, and I think that's something we need to take back and obviously discuss with Rob and the rest of the community environment team. You're absolutely right, and one of the issues we have is if we clear a fly tip away quickly, ironically, that will sometimes encourage more because they know it's taken away very, very quickly. So you could leave it there for a long time, but that obviously brings its own problems. You clear it away quickly, and then it brings more problems. So it's a never-ending battle, unfortunately.
Tim, just going on from what Mark was saying, and these sites that seem to be almost like identified as tipping points, unless they're there already, would these not be ideal places to try and put up CCTV cameras? You say there's 3 around and about for places you identify. Is there a case for identifying what, where these areas are and putting something up so that potential fly tippers can be caught on CCTV and followed up?
Again, that's certainly an idea we can take away. I think identifying spots for the cameras makes perfect sense, and again, that'll have to be something I'll discuss with Rob.
Thank you.
Then I'll go to other members. Councillor Rowley did have a hand up. Sorry, Beverly, before you.
Well, yes, a number of issues that have come forward. I'm quite surprised how big an issue it is in the rural areas as well as in the towns, because Kroll have set up Kroll Litter Heroes, and I believe they have submitted a report to you. But I've got a number of questions. I set up a Adopt a Street scheme in Tiverton, but that doesn't seem to have been publicised. That scheme, is it still running? I mean, well, I know it's still running because you keep sending me equipment, but could it be more publicised? Because the Kroll Litter Heroes obtain their own litter pickers. They could have obtained them from the Adopt a Street scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think we do enough to publicise the Adopt a Street scheme. I think that needs to be addressed. It is still running, but we need to be better at advertising the fact it is still running and what is available to people.
Yeah, I should be doing some more publicity as well, and trying to get some more people interested, because various people have left. And anyway, regarding fly tipping, there's one site off Pershaw Lane on the way to Tiverton where we again have regular tipping. And I think there is electricity there. In the rural areas, there isn't often the electricity you would need for cameras. But there is at that site, and it's one where you do get fridges, furniture, all sorts. Bredicott Lane is another area, so perhaps we could discuss that, the possibility of doing something about those 2 sites.
Absolutely. Well, I'd ask all councillors if they have any of these areas they've discussed this evening, they can email me direct about them, and then at least we can look at them and respond.
Yeah, thank you. And also evidence for prosecutions. This week I had a comment from another person who I hadn't realised was also taken on litter picking in his small village of Sale Green. And he says there are persistent people who have been been particularly persistent with littering, and he has had evidence and he's reported it, but as far as he knows, nothing has happened. I mean, can you any comment to make on that and how people can report these issues?
In terms of reporting, yeah, absolutely. Continuing to report via the usual channels. So we have now got a reporting form on the website that they can use. In terms of prosecutions and what the responses you've got for that, that's something I'll need to pick up with the community environment protection officers to find out where that particular request went and what feedback was given after the event. So again, if you can email me directly with the information about that particular request, that'd be really useful.
Yes, as I say, I've only just got these comments. And I think... finally, the contract for street sweeping. We've had a problem in Tiverton where we've had a lot of burst tyres and people have found sharp objects littering the road. And when I did report this, it was swept pretty promptly, but the problem has continued, and we have been particularly noting when these street sweeping has been occurring. And it don't seem to be keeping to the 4 times a year, which is what it should be. And I noticed you'd got other contractors who are now helping out, but surely we should be holding our contractors to keep their regular contracted sweeps going rather than sort of patching it up. I mean, surely we hold contractors to what they're supposed to be doing, don't we?
We do, but like I said at the start of the conversation, it is now the contract is managed and performance managed on an output-based, which means it's reactive sweeping that is managed on, and that's how the performance managed. It's not on the kind of the schedules which it used to be in the previous contract, and they were held to those schedules, and that's how it was managed. But when the contract changed in 2018, it was moved to an output and reactive based, and that is how it's performance managed. So holding the contracts to account, absolutely, but there's no recourse there's no penalty essentially.
It is made stricter because it has been a problem. Thank you.
Councillor Harman.
Thank you. Quickly, first thing, the cameras, they, I believe, West Mercia, Police and Crime Commissioner gave them to us because they're for funding for more crime and criminals. So we probably, if we want to do more fly tipping for that, we need to get our own more because they are, it was given by for us for crime. There is classically near us a very notorious, probably the notorious, a lot of people who need cameras, and again it's a lot of litter around there, but it's also, I must say here, very difficult for our Wychavon staff because they are intimidated and threatened and actually life-threatening. So it's very hard. Again, I drove past tonight and it's got litter again around there, and we're finding that very difficult to look after that area because of what they do and how they behave. And I know we try to put cameras on the fields there, and we got basically, they ran for their lives, our staff, because you've got to look after yourself. But that's by and by. Just thinking about litter picking, I know we've got a small amount of kits, and I'm going to throw this out now. Do you think we need, as a group, to get more litter picking kits, and then we can advertise for each area to have a litter picking day, and maybe all of us, maybe with an officer, without an officer, go around to villages and do that as a community, to try and get communities more engaged? Because I know constantly you're getting people talking about other people doing the job, and I think we all need to help each other. We can't just rely on that person doing the work. And I think supporting the villages as well as the towns, because villages struggle a lot with litter and they're very conscious of it. It's not so much litter as the towns have, but they have a lot of it by people driving through and they get upset. So I just want to know how we can do that. And at the same time, it's the education as well side we need to push. Thank you.
Did you want to come back on that, Tim?
Yeah, I think in terms of, not sure whether there was a question aimed at myself there or whether it was opened out to the floor, but I think Councillor Harman's right in terms of the safety, which is something I mentioned earlier about potential safety issues, and also the education. Absolutely, that's where we do need to focus some of the efforts as well. That's the only comment I had to make on that.
Yeah, I think an observation is, I know I don't look it, but I have been on the council for on and off 12 years. I certainly look it now probably, but I think education is a really important element of the whole measure, all the measures that we put in place to try and solve the problem. I think my concern at times has been that maybe there's been an over-reliance on education, and it's been a bit of a shield to hide behind, that we're going to focus on education and we need to focus on education, but actually that doesn't stop the fact that today there is a perception and an observation that there's litter on the street. So absolutely, I get it. It's a comment. It's not really a question, but I think it's got to be there. But I think Councillor Tucker highlighted this earlier in terms of strategy. There's a sort of in the environment, protecting the environment, the education, and then the enforcement. And I think those three things have to work hand in hand. And I think sometimes actually enforcement activity can be one of the best educators, because frankly you don't want to be have enforcement action taken against you. Now I appreciate that that's difficult for some of the more sort of trickier parts of what you're having to deal with, and I wouldn't want any officer to have their life threatened in the course of their job. trying to stop, persistent littering. That's unacceptable, and obviously we need to look at that differently. But I do think on occasion having our enforcement officers, and I appreciate it isn't your particular area, but it's a wider comment again, is, I think is all as councillors and as members of the public, we know particular venues that maybe there's a particular cigarette butt problem there, or after that type of event, or on a regular weekday when they've had their deliveries, there might be a littering issue. And I think at times for an enforcement officer just to pop in and go, we've noticed that this is a bit regular now, could we ask that you take care, wouldn't be such a bad thing. That's not to go in and start issuing fines. And I think sometimes that's what officers worry that we're going to suggest that you should go and do, is just sit there with a card machine and fine somebody as soon as they drop a cigarette. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think that would be great, but equally I don't believe it's a good use of resource either. So I appreciate that's just comment. I am waiting for the conversation to end because there's a couple of questions I have at the end, but I think, the education, I'm glad that tonight has focused on specifics about how we resolve some of these issues, because before the conversation has been too geared towards we need to put everything into education and not enough about what do we do operationally to solve the problem. So thank you for that. I think we've got some more questions. So Councillor, I think it was Councillor Gooch first, and I'll come back to.
Yeah, I just got to pick up on the question, things mentioned by both Beverly and Tim about the abuse and threats that people get when they're out there trying to do their job. I mean, what's the response of the police when this is reported to them? Are we getting any help from the police in dealing with this?
That's a valid question. I don't have the answer to that question because it'd be the Community Environment Protection Officers, so that would be Rob's team, and I'd need to double check with him what response they get from any reports they give to the police.
Yeah, it's just because this isn't a problem that we can solve. It's a problem that we need the police to be solving, because it's their job to deal with threats and violence and intimidation. But I would like to see something that we can follow up and say, why have you not dealt with these reports? What's stopping you from investigating these reports and taking action against the people who are threatening our staff?
I would like from the chair to know that actually when those particular situations have occurred, have we reported it to the police? Because we can't sit here and say the police aren't doing anything if we haven't made reports to the police to say that that's an issue. We also can't solve the littering problem. I appreciate, Tim, it's not, you're the only officer that turned up tonight, and I appreciate that's not because nobody else wanted to. They've got other commitments, but so you're getting fielded a lot of these questions. But we appreciate your attendance and noting down those questions to go forward. But I would like to know, I would definitely like the committee to know and have that update that those have been reported to the police, and if not, that's just a matter of course. It would be otherwise a bit sort of sad, because I don't think, how do we solve the problem if the police aren't, they'll just turn around and go, well, we didn't know it was an issue. Councillor Tucker.
Going back to Adopt a Street, which has been very successful, but I am aware that we had an awful lot of people sign up in Evesham initially, but there doesn't seem to be much of a two-way street, and so I think people get a bit fed up and then they don't bother. Whereas it would be nice for people who have adopted a street to know a bit more about what's happening. Is it helping? Or how many other people are there in their area that are doing it? Those sorts of things. And I thought initially there was supposed to be a newsletter that was sent out every so often, but that's never happened. So I think it might help to reinvigorate it a little bit if there was a bit more of a two-way street.
No, absolutely. And from my perspective, I can't thank those people enough who are on the Adopt a Street scheme and the anti-litter group, all the people we've mentioned today. I can't, I want to place on record my thanks to all the hard work they do, because it is, it's so important to the area. But you're absolutely right in terms of, keeping people engaged in the process. I believe there was a newsletter originally when it was launched, and I think that has slipped away for whatever reason. And I think to increase engagement, that might be something we need to look at reintroducing if possible.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Dyke.
If we're wrapping this up, can I Can I finish on a positive note?
I haven't finished my questions yet, so
Shall I come back?
you can come back if you want. If you'd like to wrap up, normally the chair does it, but you can also do it if you want. I'll give way. So, Tim, you and I have had many conversations over the last few months about different parts and pieces of, and I have to say, I really do mean this, and I appreciate the candour and the sort of the directness that we have those conversations, because I appreciate you're dealing with an issue which is quite difficult. And we mustn't forget that it's the public and our residents and the people that visit our towns that create the litter. And I do feel a bit aggrieved for officers and the council when we're sort of blamed for the litter, because we haven't created the litter. In fact, we're spending money on trying to resolve an issue which actually, if people took more responsibility, we wouldn't have to. So I think we have to frame it like that. So it's important to do that. But equally, I do have a concern that we have a contract with FCC which it appears isn't working as well as we would like it to. And I would imagine that we have service level agreements in place to make sure that we get the service that we require. I do think there's a distinction to draw. I think the refuge collection is a fantastic service. I've noted in the Signal Success there's not been a missed bin in the last quarter. I think, that's brilliant. And ultimately, we'd know about it if there'd been a missed bin, because people will tell us very quickly that it's been missed. So I think the refuge side is working really well. The street cleansing side doesn't seem to be working as well. And I think what concerns me is the single point of failure, I guess, in terms of councillors, residents calling you up and saying this hasn't happened. And your response is, I know you escalate that, and I know that I raised something about a street, whatever you call those street machine things that come up and down that, and lo and behold, I was working from home today and I saw them come down the opposite side of the road that they didn't do the other day. So I know that it's being escalated, but that's just not, you've got a job to do. You can't be that person that's constantly fielding those comments. I think we'll come on to Signal Success, which it's not that anymore, so I should stop calling it Signal Success, I appreciate. But there's, I think, the wider context as well, which concerns me about some of the stuff that we've seen, is the sort of business intelligence, which is so important to trying to resolve some of these problems. For instance, when I first saw that figure of the number of fly tipping incidents in just the last sort of few months, it was an alarming figure. But when we had a conversation, you said, well, actually, we don't know how many of those are duplicates. If somebody raises the issue on a Facebook page, how many people call up? And I think that's something that we've got to try and resolve, because that's not a fair reflection either on the work that's happening through you and others. So my question is if I was to I feel like I want to make a recommendation to executive that we need to sit down with FCC and have a frank conversation about what we believe looks good, what satisfies us in terms of activity when something's been done. And I think if we have street cleansing activity happening on a daily basis, and I appreciate that I'm one person and it's anecdotal, but I would walk down the high street taking my son to nursery regularly throughout the week, and I would follow what's happened and note that there's still litter and potential spots of grot. If that's my observation. What's the observation of the wider public? And we're spending money for that to happen, and it's not being done to what I would deem satisfactory. Now, perfect is a different thing, but satisfactory is something I think we can all come to agree on. The question I have is do we have confidence that if we were to have that conversation with FCC, that there is an opportunity within the scope of the current contract, even being a reactive contract, that we could find a way forward? Do we feel that we work well enough with FCC, that we have the relationships to draw them in and have this conversation on a professional basis, obviously, but make the point that we're not happy? And that's something that I think if I was to ask councillors for a poll survey on that, I think most of them would come back and say they're not. And I think it's incumbent on us, when we are custodians of what our ratepayers are giving to the council to make, and then what's given to our contractors to perform a service, if we're not happy with it, we need to make sure that that's known to the contractor and that we see some sort of improvement over a period of time to see that being rectified. Now, I don't know, Vic and Jane or Cherry, but you might have something you want to add to that. But I feel strongly that, I think through the comments that we've had from the public, through the comments that we've had from members here, and through the comments I have from just my inbox alone of people living in the centre of Evesham, there is a real concern, especially in this previous 12 months, that the street cleansing just hasn't met the standards of which we've been used to in the past. I appreciate that's a sort of more of a comment / question, but I would like to try and make a recommendation that would hopefully bear some fruit.
I think I think the observations and the comments we've heard tonight gives us good reason to have that conversation with FCC. So I think yeah, I mean we can do that as officers, is have the conversation, express the concerns that have been expressed this evening, and see if there's some sort of plan to rectify the situation. There's a couple of years left on the contract, and I think you know, I think we probably need that conversation with FCC. So if you leave that with officers to take that forward, that I think would be an appropriate way forward.
You're happy to report back to us on that, whether that's to the committee or to just some correspondence to say that that's happened?
Yeah, we can include that in the roundup or something of that nature, just to keep the committee.
And will that include the executive member attending that meeting as well?
That's a matter for the executive member and the director and Tim, but I don't see why not. But I'll leave that to them to decide between them.
Okay. Well, I'd urge the executive member to attend that meeting, given that she's here today.
Can I just ask a question? I also like to throw back to you and say exactly what's the level you're thinking of, and to clarify it, because we could come up with a contract and be happy with it, but you might not be. So I want to also throw back to you what you're sort of thinking of as level of service.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. And again, this is anecdotal, and I've shared this with Tim. But last week I walked down after a litter pitting exercise. You know, it usually happens between 7:30 to 8:15. That's the time I've taken my son to nursery. I walked past the bin and there was a load of broken glass around it. That to me is not satisfactory. And I've raised that with Tim, and I know that he would have taken that further. But that's what I'm asking for, is that if somebody's walking down the street and picking up litter and tidying up the street scene, that broken glass is picked up. I think that's a pretty basic level of satisfactory. And given the fact that I have a young son and I see young children walking down and up the high street to go to school, we shouldn't have glass on the street once we've had a company that we've paid money to go down and pick up litter. So that's where I'm coming from, and I think I think everybody would agree that that's a fair perspective. I don't, I'm not expecting them to polish the bins or anything like that. I understand there's limitations to what people can and can't do. I also understand picking up cigarette butts is really difficult. It's also disgusting. I don't expect that to always be a miraculously, always tidied up. But I think we have to also understand that if we have a schedule, how often are we doing a deep clean versus just a street cleanse and things like that? So that would be my observation.
I did read in the papers for an overview and scrutiny meeting not so long ago that you did have a whole scheme showing the frequency that street sweeping had been happening. And that's what I based my comment on, that it hadn't been happening according to that schedule as regards Tiverton. So there must be something there.
I think there is a schedule. I see the street cleanse every single day. I don't doubt that they're on the street doing it, but
I haven't been keeping to it. That was
no, and I think and I think that might be another comment and suggestion, is that actually, if Tim can share that schedule with us as councillors, as people that are out in the wards living, and representing our areas, if we see that it hasn't been done, we can raise that. But unless we know the schedule, we can't. Equally, I think the Adopt the Street is a really important scheme. I think a lot of people would be happy to do that, but I think it would be good to do a re-promotion of that either through the Whichever magazine or some social media activity. I think the new year is a good opportunity. People are looking for a volunteering opportunity to give something back. It might be I appreciate it's short notice. I forgot what I was going to say. I'll come back to me in a minute. I think the Adopt the Street is an important part of that, but I equally think whether we could share the schedule publicly as well. I think that's part of the problem on some of the streets. I think residents would move their car if they knew that on a Wednesday, every 4 weeks or whatever, there's likely to be a street cleanse. And I appreciate we can't, there's the mitigating circumstances there. It might not always happen. But would it be something that we could share with residents, or as councillors that we could share with our residents, to say, look, yeah, you know, if you want to help keep your streets clean, make sure your car's not parked on the road if you've got a driveway and stuff like that. Now, we're going into the operational details, so I appreciate that this isn't a helpful conversation. I'm happy to take it outside of it. But I think that, yeah, I'm glad, Vic, that we can take that forward and have that conversation with FCC. I'd highly recommend that, I can't get my words out, I'm tired. I would like the executive member to be there, because I'd like somebody that represents us as councillors to be in that room. And I think because Beverly's also been here and heard our feedback this evening, I think, and I'll let Councillor Dyke do the final roundup, but I do think that there has been a noticeable step change since you've joined the team, and that I absolutely believe that you are taking on board our comments and want to make those changes. I'd also note that we're going through the budget scrutiny process at the moment. I don't know what your budget looks like, or the directorate looks like, or whether you've made suggestions for further budget. But I, urged that was something that was also considered at this time. We often look at these types of activity, and I think it's important that if we feel like we could do a promotion of Adopt a Street, but we need to buy another 20 packs to do that, then because it would be a real shame if we get people come forward to say they want to do it, and we have to say you're going to have to wait 12 months to get the stuff. That just seems a bit of a shame. So we might not be in that position, but I'd just say that if we are, that we should look at it now. Councillor Dyke.
And just as a final down, it would have been useful for Ian Edwards to be here, I think. But
Ian did give his apologies, and he gave them quite a while ago. So
did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's
I withdraw.
He has
that
another
then.
work commitment, Chairman.
Yeah. No, and that's what I'm saying. So it's not. I don't think he'd send him into the Lion's Den on loan. And to be fair to Ian, as an officer, he regularly attends ONS, and I think I did have a conversation with him last week, and he said it was regrettable that he couldn't be here.
Good.
So and I think he's everything that Tim has said.
Yeah.
He has heard, and the stuff that we've talked about with FCC, and wanting to have that conversation and just sort of reaffirm that.
Good.
Sort of what do we expect?
Glad I mentioned it, because these things need to be said.
Absolutely.
On a positive side, there's a part off Davis Road that's in our ward, and it's been plagued with litter and broken glass and all sorts of things for a long time. Within that, there is a covered bench that's stylishly done, and it was forever getting graffitied and what have you. And then, I don't know who it was, but somebody that must have been arranged through the council have done the most amazing pictures on it, inside and outside, and it looks fantastic. And since then, I am told, broken glass is not so much, litter is not so much, fag ends are not so much. So that whole, just doing that, and I was talking to some lads, I was over there the other week, talking to some lads, and said, what do you think of this thing? And they all went, fantastic, it's really good, yeah. They were very positive about it. They were mid-teenagers, I would guess, something like that. So well done, whoever did that, and maybe that's another way we could do something in the future to, to try and get the litter thing done. But yeah, well done, well done.
Yeah, I wish I could take personal credit for that. Unfortunately, that was our communities team in conjunction with our side, the youth centre, and it means a lot to them as well, because it honours one of their caseworkers who unfortunately passed away. So it's it's a fantastic addition.
One final comment, yeah.
No, just going on from what Councillor Dyke was saying, with the outside team, with that graffiti, if people are not aware, they have got an open time this Saturday from 11 o'clock, specifically to identify that, and everyone's welcome. That's purely something that I learnt from Robbie.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for attending, Tim, and for having a worthwhile conversation. So we do appreciate it. Thank you. So moving on to, I need to get the right name now, to the We Are Wychavon 6 monthly performance update, which Cherry's going to talk to that. I think unless you've got a burning desire to ask a question as Cherry's talking, we'll leave questions until the end of the presentation. And Tim, if you want to go, feel free to do so. I think God knows most people would like to.
Good evening, everyone. Apologies, I also have a cold and cough, so I might be a bit croaky. Oh, and it also looks like oh, well, that's not showing up particularly well. I wonder if we could put some lights off. That's, yeah. I also seem to have managed to type a random 9 on that, so apologies for that. So I thought what it might be useful to do is briefly talk you through what's different about this report. I mean, you'll be able to spot quite a lot of it because it looks quite different to the previous Signals of Success report, and highlight some of the changes I've made based on the feedback and suggestions you made at the overview and scrutiny workshop on this in April time. So I won't go through it in detail, but I'll just highlight some of those things. So first of all, as the chairman's already noted, I've decided to call it the We Are Witchaven Performance Report. Signals of Success has been around for years and years, so I thought it was time for a bit of a change. So the report you've got today is a 6-monthly one, but normally they will be quarterly. It's just with the peer challenge happening, we decided it made sense to do the report the first 2 quarters together. So the contents page, I think, is fairly self-explanatory. With the visuals that we've got in here, we've got the ability to change those each report, so you won't have Robbie in a phone box every quarter. Don't know what you will have. So the introduction is fairly standard, talking about what is in the report, but what I've done on this page is highlight some of the main changes that I've made to the report to help you kind of understand those. So a really obvious one, which you all have spotted, is the visual presentation is different. Hopefully it gives us a little bit more flexibility, makes it perhaps a little more engaging for me to write as well. So there's a bit of selfishness in there. So a couple of the main changes I will go through with you in detail. So the first section is a 2-page section, and I'm planning to try and keep this to 2 pages, and it's a brief overview of performance as a whole. So this first page looks at the We Are Witchaven plan promises and also the outcome measures, and through the charts gives a summary of how we're doing. Now, at this stage in the plan, these are probably not massively helpful because we're on track with everything. It's a 4-year plan, so if we had lots of ambers and reds in there would be a problem. But as time goes on in the plan, I suspect that will change a bit and they might become a bit more useful. The second page of this section is new, so you will have spotted that we've introduced 2 new sets of measures, one around service demand and one around service performance, and this section is giving an overview of those by directorate, and that's reflected in those bar charts. Again, it's quite a high level overview. Then the next 3 sections are based around each of our 3 new priorities: people, place and environment. So the first page is just a reminder of what we're aiming to achieve under those, and then there is a 1-page which summarises just a few highlights in terms of promises and any outcome measures. So there's not narrative in here about every promise under people or place or environment. It's just picking out a few areas and also picking out any specific concerns this quarter. And then I've referenced where you can find more detail in the appendices. And again, the visuals on the right will change as time goes on. So that's the place one, looks very similar, and this is the environment one. The environment one also briefly mentions how we're doing on our intelligently green plan actions, rather than having that as a separate point in the plan, in the report. The next section is just a one-page on financial performance. I'd be interested in hearing, perhaps after I've finished, if there's anything you as a committee would find it particularly helpful to have in that section, whether presenting the information in that way is useful. That's information that you get in elsewhere anyway. Then the final section at the moment is quite meaty, I suppose, and that summarises the service demands and performance information. And there's a page for each directorate which has a combination of a couple of charts and also some commentary. Obviously these sections are brand new, so I suspect as time goes on they will evolve a little bit. We can't include charts for everything, so I'm quite keen this report doesn't become too long. But the detail, as previously, is in the appendices. So as I said, there's one of these for each of the 5 directorates. At the moment, we haven't got anything on partner performance in here. It is an aim to start adding things like Worcestershire Regulatory Services, Wychavon Leisure, and a few other partner performance areas. And so you will see them appear as we go on with future reports. I just want to go back to the summary of the changes, just highlight a couple of other things. So in terms of the appendices, you've got two new appendices, which are the service demands and service performance. We have included, which was something you requested, direction of travel ratings in those. So up, sideways and down arrows, which depending on if it's a demand, it's increased, little change, or decreased. I don't think reduced, that's the word. If it's performance, then it's improved, little or no change, or worsened. We do also, on the performance measures, still have the red, amber and green ratings. And one of my questions is, does that confuse things? Do you need both? Again, on the outcome measures, we've got red, amber and green ratings, and we've also got direction of travel, because some of the outcome measures, which some of them we only report once a year, are not directly in our control, so we haven't previously given them a red, amber, green rating. So that's a question to consider. Also this time, at your request, we've tried to only include the rows in those appendices where we've got data to report. So measures that we report once a year, say those that come from the resident survey, all those rows are hidden. Next quarter you will see those. So hopefully you're only looking at stuff where there's actually something new. So any feedback on that would be welcome. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour about what's changed. I'm sure we will make further changes, less fundamental ones, but I know when we had the presentation from our peer team, there was a few things they said that when we get our final report from them, we may want to make a few more changes. Also, we're looking at a Microsoft application called Power BI that can do amazing things with data, and if we get to grips with that and we think some of what it can do is useful, we might be able to plonk some of it in here. So there may be other changes, but I think this is kind of the fundamental change, and then the rest will be kind of tweaks. But I'd welcome any feedback or comments or things you think that's really good, but actually that's not quite what we had in mind. The executive board, I don't know if any of you watched online. I don't, other than Beverly, I'm not sure anybody, and Mark, I'm not sure anybody else was present. It was a fairly empty room. They liked this format, so I think they were pleased with the changes that you had suggested.
Thanks, Terry. I think that it's like a noticeable improvement, and that's not to say what we had before wasn't good. I think it's just a fact that this hopefully is a more agile document that allows us to actually, when we're sitting here and sort of reviewing it and scrutinising it, we're focusing on the bits that we need to, and not, like you say, the bits that only change annually and other things. I think it's right to note that this is, you know, the combination of efforts that have got us to this point, and actually there's probably still some changes that will happen and different things that will come out. But I'm really happy to hear that as a council we're looking at applications like Power BI. I mean, I would say, like all applications, it's only as powerful as the people that use it, and something like my experience with Power BI is you do normally need a specialist to make the most of it, and I don't know what the plans are around that, but I think definitely in terms of real-time reporting and understanding business intelligence as a sort of moment in time and actually in time, it's a great application to do that. So I think that's a brilliant. Is that something that came out of the peer review, or is that that was something you've thought about already? Oh, I think that's really a good improvement. So I'll let the committee ask their questions. Charles was first.
Thank you, and thank you, Cherry, for the introduction. I'm not quite clear what the service demand measures by directorate and the service performance measures by directorate actually show us. I see there are numbers there within the bars, but in fact I'm very pleased that you're here tonight, because the strategy and resources ones show reduced demand within strategy and resources but worsened performance. Now I'm sure that that's not quite accurate, but can you give us a little bit more clarity on what is what this really shows us, and how you look at those strategy and resources bars?
The purpose of including the service demand performance measures was to give a broader picture of what's going on across the council, rather than just on what's going on in terms of what's specifically in the We Are Wychavon plan. Because yes, what's in that plan is a priority for us, but those are not the only things we're doing. So the purpose of the service demand measures in particular was, over time, to share with councillors and the public, if they're interested, you know, the changes in demand on the organisation. Until we've got some trend data, that can be quite tricky to see. And the service performance was to look at some of the other things we do and how well we're doing on those. So the bar charts on that slide that I've got up are just a summary of what's in Appendix E and F. So the detail of the measures they relate to are in those appendices, which I can probably try and have a quick look at. And obviously those measures don't still reflect everything we do. They're measures that, you know, we can easily report on. They're not every single thing. So I'm just having a quick look at the demand measures for strategy and resources. So they include revenues and benefits. So in terms of some of the things that have gone down, the average time to fill vacant posts has gone down, which is good news because it means we're recruiting and getting the right people quicker. The number of new council tax support claims has gone down, and the number of housing benefit change of circumstances has gone down, but the number of council tax support change of circumstances has gone up. In terms of the performance, bear with me. There are difficult to see. So the proportion of abandoned calls has slightly got worse. Yeah.
Sorry, if I can, Chair. So the ones on council tax, and it's generally on the council tax support claims, the number of days it's taking to process. So we have a Revenues Benefits Management Board, because of course the service covers ourselves more than Worcester City, and we picked this up as well a couple of weeks ago. We've had more complex claims come in, and so the team have been spending time doing those, which has meant, unfortunately, the number of days, which you can see on page 28, on the graph there, you can see they have increased quite significantly up to 45 days from 17.7. So we've picked that up and we've put what we've got is a bit of a generic team approach now, so we can move some of the team across from just normal housing benefit over to council tax support. So that's what we have done to ensure, and this is what this gives us, this performance report gives us the ability to then say, we'll take some of the stuff of that to ensure that we can then pick up the council tax support claims and make sure that they're completed more quickly. So that's the position. That's why I believe that the performance looks worse, is worsening, because of there's quite a difference in those council tax support claims. So while it looks like they've gone down, the more complex ones, and as Cherry said, the change of circumstances, because we get a lot of change of circumstances with people in and out of work almost on sometimes a weekly or bi-weekly basis, unfortunately, because of the nature of some of the work around the district. So we have now put almost like an action together, a target team, which is what we do during the year, just to make sure that we can get those back down to where they should be.
I'm just thinking that the terminology there gives the wrong impression, because it's suggesting that the blue bar is reduced demand, but from what you're saying, it's not actually reduced demand; it's actually better performance, and you're actually doing better.
It is, some of the demand has been reduced in terms of, I'm just talking about one little element of the whole of strategy and resources. So while some of the housing benefit claims have gone down because more people are moving to universal credit that we don't deal with, council tax support has gone down, the complexity is therefore taking longer, the team are taking longer to do some of those claims, which is why we're moving some of the team around to make sure that we undertake the processing time in the right amount of days. So it isn't about there's not an increase in that demand.
Just looking at those bars there, it doesn't seem to do you justice really, because it does say that you've got a reduced demand, but you've got a worsened performance. And is that fair to say?
No, that is at the moment. Which is, as I say, we've got a reduced demand. That is a little element, but if I just take quite a big part of that, which is revenues and benefits, there is a reduced demand because the number of processing coming through is less, but the complexity of that is harder.
Just so I understand, we're talking about the figures for the whole service, aren't we? We're not talking about just Wychavon. This is just Wychavon. Sorry, I was just checking it wasn't including the figures for Malvern and no. Okay, right, fair enough. Yeah, okay, fair enough.
But that's a good point, because for some of the services, so fixed penalty notices for car parking covers all of the councils they cover, rather than just Wychavon, because that is a demand on the service. So what we need to be clear is, for each measure, are we talking about just Wychavon, or the service as a whole, if it's a shared service. The other thing with the demand measures, all that chart is showing is, out of the demand measures we are reporting on, 6 of them have reduced, 3 of them haven't changed much, and 2 have increased. It doesn't mean the amount of demand is equal. So the 6 that have reduced may be very small numbers that have reduced to even smaller numbers, and the 2 that have increased may be quite big numbers that have increased even further. It's purely just an overview, which is why, as a committee, you also need to look at the detail behind it to help you understand. Right, so, okay, it looks like there's less demands on strategy and resources. Right, actually, what is going on there?
Which comes on to another point, and the thing that I probably have struggled most with this report always is trying to review it on an iPad. It's incredibly difficult it's just an unwieldy report on an iPad so you're basically, what you're saying, it makes absolute sense. We need to see this sort of overview, but then we need to refer to the detail. Trying to flick between that constantly to inform ourselves and then come up. I can't tell you how many times I get so frustrated. Like, I've seen that, I know I've read it, and I can't now find it, and I have to go back again, and it takes more time. So I mean, I would like to say, just, and I don't know what the rest of the committee feel, but it does feel to me that it would be useful actually to have this report printed, because I think actually that would allow with us to engage with it better. Now, I appreciate that takes us a step back in where we want to be in digital, But if we really want to engage with this report and make sure that when we come, we're prepared and we can really talk to it, I feel that I know I would find it much more useful to have it as a printed document. So I don't know whether that's something that can go away and thought about. I appreciate that has implications with getting out and et cetera, but it might actually be something that, because it's published with the executive board, might even, if it was to go out at a similar time to the ONS committee, it might even give us more time to review it. But yeah, that's just a wider point, and I think the way you've just highlighted it, it sort of demonstrates the issues that sometimes we have as a committee.
Yeah, I think.
Just quickly about that iPads, I have asked Vic, and he's looking at it, whether we, in next set time, have laptops, not iPads, because that'd be more useful to use. That's something being considered for councillors.
I'd rather have a printed report than a laptop, to be honest. But yeah, but I'm not referring. Yeah, everything else I'm quite happy with, and I think, this was some of the comments that we had in our pre-meet. It's difficult because this layout is definitely really helpful, but if we have to refer to the detail and the way that it's not even like I have to have a printed agenda when we do a meeting like this, because otherwise I have to always flip back to the beginning to see the agenda. It's not ideal, but equally I understand the moves to go paperless. But I think this report might be helpful if we could have it as a printed document sent to us.
I mean, I find it difficult on a laptop, so I can imagine on an iPad it would be quite tricky. So actually, this is something the leader also mentioned when we discussed the new report. Well, not just when we discussed the new report, but discussed it with exec board. So I think, are you saying you need the covering report as well, or is it really just the appendices that would be beneficial to be printed?
I think it, in its entirety as a report, would be the best way for us to receive it.
I think we can do that. It's the getting it out to you that's the tricky bit.
Some of it also helps some of it to be A5 when I've got A4
A3.
A3. Sorry, A3. I've got an A4 version, which is quite small, so yeah.
Then I don't want it either, to be honest with you.
I can't even remember what A5 is.
It's about that big thing. It's like half A4.
Councillor Googe.
Yeah, I mean, just following on from that, I mean, I really like the format of the new report overall. There's a couple of minor tweaks I would still quite like to be made to the appendices. One of them is reading through it, it's not always immediately obvious what the target date is. I know the target date of a promise is hidden away in the small print, but it's not. It would be nice if we could have that more at a glance and actually have that as a separate column. I know that's going to make the report even fatter and cause even more problems reading it on a small screen. But the other thing I was going to ask for that is, I know you have to convert it to PDF to go on the website and ModGov, but for those of us on the committee, could you send us the original spreadsheet? Because that makes it a lot easier then to read and analyse actually there on a computer and sit and look at it, because you can zoom in and even add notes to the spreadsheet yourself then before coming to talk about it at the committee.
The challenge with that is the spreadsheet has links to other spreadsheets. So we'd have to, you might want to advise me on how best to do that, Mark. No, but we could send it as a spreadsheet. That's not the problem. It's where it's drawing its data from that's the problem. Unless we convert those links into text or something.
I think there's a way of exporting it into a new spreadsheet that pulls all the data and then pushes it into a new spreadsheet that's completely independent. But that's possibly something that your IT department might hopefully be able to help you with. I mean, I will say that sticking it all into Power BI would solve that anyway, but of course that is a big task. It's not a trivial overnight change.
I think could you have it on a spreadsheet? In theory, yes, but if we could get round that links issue.
I think what Councillor Googe said about moving it into Power BI will give you more flexibility to eventually, once you've done it, I saw the horror on your face, and I don't expect it for next meeting. But eventually, that, I mean, just in terms of all kinds of reporting, it's going to have much better functionality. But okay, that's a. I think in the interim, I appreciate what Councillor Cridge is saying. But if we can look to have a printed copy, I think that would be a huge step forward.
And in terms of the promises, I don't see why we can't add a column with the target date for the promises. That's fine. I mean, the other thing is, are there still columns on there that you think you don't need to see? Because we can hide as many columns as we want. So if you think, well, I really don't need to know that, and you all agree, that's the key point, then we can reduce the number of columns.
Well, I mean, my feedback as well, that doesn't help you at all, is that, I mean, it is here, but I want to make sure that we continue to have quarter one update, quarter two update, quarter three update that run along, so that we continue to see that narrative in the report with the 12-month cycle. Because if that starts to drop off, that's always concerns me, is if we want to know what happened in quarter one, we might have to refer back to an earlier report, and that's also not conducive to reviewing a report.
So is that just for the measures, or is that for the promises as well? Because the feedback I got at the workshop, which I appreciate you were unable to attend, was the committee didn't want to see narrative updates from previous quarters.
I think the difference is if the narrative is unchanged, then it just needs to be in that quarter, no change.
That's part of the purpose. So if we're talking about Appendix A, which is the promises, part of the purpose of the direction of travel in that particular appendix was to say the RAG, so the red, amber, green on the promises, is the same as last quarter, or hasn't changed, or has got worse. So therefore you wouldn't need to have the narrative from the previous quarters, because other members of the committee said we don't need all that. I mean, we can give you whichever you want, but you all need to agree.
Yeah, but so at the moment we have quarter one and quarter two, but I guess you're only doing that because this is a combined report. But I find that, personally, quite useful. And maybe I can take that away and have that conversation. But I just feel that actually the narrative is the bit that changes, actually. And if we can't refer back to what was said in quarter one when we get to quarter four, other than going back to a previous report, that doesn't allow us always to give, a proper review of the overall report. And I'm just reflecting on my own professional experiences. I think if I was to start taking quarter one out and only updating on quarter two, that my trustees would say, you ain't doing that, mate. Get it back in there. So I apologise if I've put a spanner in the works, but it's just a comment. I think it's probably just highlighted by the fact that it's here now, and I find it really useful. But I don't appreciate we don't want to make a wider. We can do that over email and work that out, I think.
If you could collectively decide, I mean, what we used to do is you used to get the current quarter and the previous quarter, so the equivalent of what you've got tonight. But based on the feedback, I was only going to give you next quarter, quarter three. But if you're saying, no, we definitely want quarter two and quarter one as well, you can have that. Just agree what it is you want.
I'll take that as an action and come back to you. That's fine. Councillor Crum.
Just going on from what was being said about the printing of the report, I personally would find that really, really useful. And if we could have it, as you say, the same time as the exec, because we have Spencer asking us for questions and haven't had any questions yet, we haven't had any questions, and we want to get them to you early enough so that you can get a response. But with everything else going on, if we can have these at the earliest possible opportunity on a printed format would be ideal. And if it's a case that it goes to the exec and then things are changed, you could just send us a little extra or something just to say, by the way, this has changed. If you could do it that way, I think that was sort of consensus earlier, that would really, really help us, so that we're doing something useful rather than just, sort of flicking through it. And, we want to try and make it a positive scrutiny for you.
Yeah, I think that's fine. There are sometimes a few changes because new data becomes available, but it's not a massive change between the two meetings. So I think there's about 3 extra measures in this one that weren't in the exec board portion, but I could just highlight to you what they are.
Thanks. And also with the next, when do we get the next one? Because the next one will be it's September to December, is that correct?
October to December.
Yeah.
So I've just been looking at the dates today, actually. If possible, you will get it at your February ONS. I do say that with a caveat, because to be in a position to put the report together requires everybody else to do their bit on time and provide the information and provide decent narrative. So that's pretty tight in terms of timescales, but that's what I'm aiming for.
Okay, yeah, just thinking from the point of view of, obviously this is to September, and we don't want us to be reporting on old news that is sort of, oh, that's now moved on from that point, and so it's sort of fresh for everybody really and useful.
That is always one of the challenges with this report, which we've never cracked. It relies on timings of meetings. You know, the ideal would be you'd be discussing the performance for a quarter within a month of that quarter ending, but often the meetings don't align with that, and we've never really cracked that, I don't think.
Councillor Juditek.
Thank you. Just answering your earlier question about the RAG ratings and the direction of travel. I'm quite happy for both of those to be in. I think they're quite useful.
Any other questions? I just have a couple of points, basically. So there was one bit on legal and governance there. We sort of talked about freedom of information requests and then being dealt with in the time frames and stuff, which is great. And it's just an observation that, yeah, maybe I should know, but in terms of subject access requests, I don't know what the time frame is. And for instance, you say we've met within the timescales, but we didn't meet one in time. It would just be if it was consistent to sort of just say, you know, within 20 days of receiving them, that's what FOIs are, and what is it for SARs, basically. That would just be, you know, it just helps, basically. And I think there was something else I wanted to... Yeah, so, and then the other thing was, so this is the complexities of data and everything else, and how we frame it. So we've spoken earlier about the number of instances of fly tipping, and that being a figure that is alarming, but actually when you dig into it, there's duplicates. But equally, is it not good that we have a high number? It's not good that we have a high number of instances of fly tipping, but that's different from a high number of reported incidences. So if people are reporting it, that's actually a positive thing. We should, you know, in some ways we need to celebrate the fact that they've been able to find that on the internet, they've been able to report it, and that's come to us. I just wonder, in that sort of bullet point, that's on economy and environment. We sort of say, we talk about the notable increase, and we do mention duplicates, but we don't really say pro-con type thing. I understand it's difficult to do in 20 words, but that's the kind of thing that I think I could read that in a positive way or a negative way. And I think, yeah, that, and obviously that's something that's already been mentioned this evening, and I know probably it's being looked at. And I just wanted to say about, well done about the unsolicited compliments for the parks and grounds maintenance and the public toilets, I think, and no complaints at all, which is, considering that would have been over the busiest period of which they would have been accessed and used, I think that's fantastic. I mean, I know we're known for our loos, but it's it's good. Those are things that people will. I think if we can get that right, then hopefully people feel like we're getting other things right as well. And the only other comment I wanted to make was, so I quite like the sort of RAG rating and the sort of movement. The question I have though is that some of them on green, for instance, have then referred to the fact that it's worsening in the other column. So green to me feels like everything's hunky-dory, and I'm trying to find the particular... Yeah, I'm trying to find it now. Which I probably won't be able to do, which is what I was saying earlier.
I found one actually.
Yeah, found one.
So I'm in Appendix F.
Yeah.
So overall sickness absence. So we've set a target for that, which actually isn't showing on here, but I think it's 8.7 or 8.5 days, I think. So we're still on track for that target, but if you look across the last 4 quarters, it's pretty evident that sickness absence has got worse.
Yeah.
So that's partly why I asked the question about RAG and direction of travel, because the two do not necessarily say the same
Sure,
thing.
I understand. I think we need both. It was just trying to understand how that, because there's another one here about IG11, which is promote development of further renewable energy schemes in the district, blah, blah, blah. And it's on track, but then it's got worsened. And it's just trying to, so I guess, you know, with this amount of detail, you're looking at greens and thinking, oh, they're okay. So you kind of, you might do a kind of a spot analysis and see what's going on. But actually, I'm always drawn to the reds because I feel like that's where our time is best spent. Yeah. But it's just trying to understand that. I don't know the answer. It's just a point.
I think perhaps what we need to think about is the direction of travel being clear. What is this a direction of travel of?
Yeah.
So with the measures, it's the direction of travel with the number, if you like. If good performance is a higher number and it's showing improved, then that sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think maybe we just need to think about being crystal clear what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think, you know, this is the first iteration we've seen it. I think this is the whole point now, that we try and you just work that out, I guess. It's just, but that's just, I think, it's the same with if it's on green, but actually things have improved.
Yeah.
Are we making sure that we're doing more of that stuff that's improving, or we're just accepting it's green and we're sort of just, nothing ever gets doesn't get delved into in more detail. But yeah, those are my observations. Can I just also ask, so in terms of Power BI, it sounds obviously like it's a relatively new decision and you've got to figure it all out. Is that something that's going to be implemented across all service areas for reporting in the future? Or I suppose you're going to pilot it first and see what happens. And
so we're already using Power BI to do stuff around intelligence about the district. But the LGA have recently done a webinar on using Power BI for performance reporting. So in terms of what you get, that's something I want to explore, where it adds value. So for things like promises, it probably won't.
No.
But for some of these measures, it probably will. Power BI is being looked at in other areas. We haven't got a big Power BI program at the moment. I think it's fair to say it's early days. It's very, very powerful, as you've commented, but it's also quite complex.
Yeah. You need a specialist. You need somebody that can help you to do that. Yeah.
So, I don't.
Okay,
it's just. I can answer.
But I think it's a really to hear that that's even being considered. I think
Yeah.
that's a really positive step forward. And the only other thing was that we've talked about other performance data and some of the things we've talked about tonight. One of the things, and business as usual activity is one of the things that it's much more evident now in this report. Hasn't always been evident in previous examples of success. So I really am happy to see that. I still think there's bits and pieces that I would like to see, and that refers to things, functionality that we have in terms of the report it, how many reported things came in and how long did it take to deal with them and things like that. I think that's, that's just, I get it's operational, but it's important in terms of if somebody is issuing something. I know Councillor Googe, for example, must be one of the most prolific users of Report It. But I think, how do we know how quickly we're resolving those issues once they've been reported? And I'd like to see some of that sort of in time. How we integrate that into the reporting would be really useful. I'd like to see that. But I think, well done. And you've had considering everything else that's gone on in the last 6 months. So congratulations. And I think I'm really pleased as a piece of work. I think it was something where ONS added some real value. And I'm glad that we were able to all work together to get something that's come out of it. I think we should be, we are pleased with it. So, Councillor Dyke.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I should know the answer to this, but there's lots of black areas, like in page 57, for example. There's lots of black bits.
This is in the appendices, is it?
Yeah, appendix F.
Yeah. So the black areas
Yeah.
are where either we hadn't started recording that data then, so we're not expecting anything in those boxes. You'll also see black areas if it's a measure we only report once a year, so you'll see a figure in the quarter for that measure and the rest will be black. So if there's a white box, there should be something in it, and it's probably that nobody's provided that data. So the black. Well, zero can be confusing. I mean, there are zeros pulling through in the commentary, which is all to do with this linked spreadsheet. So where it's pulling zero through, there is no comment in the spreadsheet. So the black, if it's black, it's not alarming. There shouldn't be anything in there.
I mean, I agree. Difference between white and black. White means there should be, a white box means there should be data, but data is missing. Black means there shouldn't be any data, it's just a null box. Yeah. But on the other, I do agree with Andy that black does make it look a bit messy. Could you just make it grey instead?
Well, you'd be glad to know that one of the comments earlier was if we ask for a printed report, they can do it. Initially, Councillor Googe said you can do it in grayscale. I said, I don't think, Mark, that would be very useful to us to see this report
If you do make it in grey rather than black, it will take less ink to print.
True.
I think grey. No, seriously, I think grey would actually be a better colour for just indicating not expected to be filled. I think black possibly means. Black is normally used in reports where we've redacted information, and I suspect that some people reading this might think that's what it means here.
It's a fair comment. Okay. All right. Are we happy then to move on to the next item?
Do you have any questions on the actual content of the report?
Okay. Yes.
Do I get away?
Okay. We do, Cherry. So I will start with Councillor Crump and move around the table. So Councillor Crump.
Okay. Right, I did submit these to Spencer beforehand. So on the, I've just been trying to find out which ones they were on. The page 29, A724, the tickets ride. We're saying identify the need for community-led rural transport projects and use this to target our Ticket to Ride fund by the 31st of March 2028. My question is, when will the survey be available and will it be published? Bus routes and services are always a topic of conversation, but what is the real need, especially rurally, as opposed to the want?
Thank you for this question and your others, which I did get, and I have got responses. So the response to this one's from me. So I think you've summed up in the final part of your question what is the real need rather than the want, and that was really at the heart of the research that we've done. So there was a survey, and there was also a lot of face-to-face engagement in a number of areas across the district at events over the summer. So we're now currently pulling all of that together. And the plan is that we will share the results of that at the Communities Panel meeting in January, which I think is the 20th of January. Rural panel members have been invited to that, and any councillors are welcome to come. If you want us to come back to a future ONS and do a separate session on it, then we can. So we're currently pulling the results together and hoping to at least partially answer that question around need rather than want. There are certainly some common themes coming out of the survey and the face-to-face engagement. But what that all means for us, I think is probably a little bit too early to say.
Yeah, so as a rural councillor, we constantly get asked about transport, and we just say to people, but the reason you lost it was because you weren't using it. And do people just think they should have a bus service as opposed to need a bus service? And you know, I'm more than happy to fight for if it's a needed thing, but how much of it is actually needed, as we say? So yeah, I'd be really interested to know from my point of view, as well as the ONS side, where we get, where we come out from this. But thank you for doing the survey as well, because I know it has been quite extensive.
And I think one of the things it has shown is, people immediately jump to the conclusion a bus is the answer, and it's often not. There are quite a lot of transport options available, including commuter transport. We have now got a page on our website that signposts and links to some of what is available. What the consultation has shown is there's a very low level of awareness of some of the services that are actually in existence. So anything you can do as councillors to promote those is a good first step. It's not probably the only step.
Would it be possible to, that's probably something you're considering doing as well, put it out in the Whitchaven News, because everybody's going to get that. So when we know where we're at with the survey and give the information there, and put out to people that, might not go to parish councils, of which there's many, that, they would be getting the information directly, sent to them, and show that we are actually trying to do what they're asking for. Okay, my next question. Sorry, guys. I know you want to go home. The Wellbeing Hub expansions to rural areas. My question is the need in these areas higher than originally thought, and has it increased with the loss of the winter fuel allowance? Is this effect being closely monitored by Whitchaven, and how are individuals being encouraged to come forward to support for support that does not involve social media?
Okay, so this response is from David Manning, Head of Communities. So he says it's too early to say whether the loss of the winter fuel allowance has had an impact, but we have looked at the potential impact of that in the way we've distributed the latest round of the Household Support Fund, and also how we're going to distribute the next round. In terms of the kind of wellbeing hubs, he says Whitchaven's higher than national suicide rate suggests there is a need for mental health and wellbeing support in rural communities, and we're monitoring that closely with public health on an approximately quarterly basis. In terms of reaching people by means other than through social media, the latest edition of the Whitchaven magazine, which has recently come out, includes a piece on, I think, pension credit. And we are working with CALC to look at the rural offer on health and wellbeing and the role of parish councils. And we're working with Citizens Advice on rural outreach and development of mental health and financial advice in rural communities.
Thank you. I've nearly finished, guys, sorry. This one isn't actually on one of my areas, but I noticed the part that said about residual waste impacted by the Worcestershire's wide high rejection rate. Now, something that somebody had actually said to me, first of all, why is there such a high rejection rate, and how is this being addressed? But also, is all recycling traceable? As recent reports nationally said that things are being shipped overseas at extortionate rates, and do we actually are we able to trace all our recycling?
So in terms of the first part about the reject rate, and this response is from Tim, who was here earlier, it's the overall reject rate for everything that's taken to the EnviroSort plant. So it covers all the districts that serve that, as well as household recycling centres. So there's no way of saying that those are Whitchaven's rejects, those are Redditch's or whoever else is going there. We do get monthly samples, which gives a flavour of our own individual reject rate, and the results are usually much lower than the county-wide figure. So we are one of the most proactive districts in terms of trying to increase the proportion of waste that is recycled. So, for example, we've launched a litter lotto and are in the process of launching a new resident engagement programme, which will include elements of recycling. We've now got an online recycling search on our website where residents can put in an item and it will tell them what to do with it. So we've got a lot of kind of proactive stuff going on, but that's not necessarily going to be reflected in our recycling or our waste figure because of this reject rate. So it's the way we have reported for a while. I know Tim was looking at, was there a way we could do our own set of calculations using what comes from the monthly sampling. I think the problem is we might then be reporting something different to the government to what we'd be reporting here. So I don't know what the answer is to that. It is an issue because if we're putting all this effort in, we kind of want to see the results in our figures. In terms of the question about waste, where recycling ends up, we don't trace it. The County Council are the disposal authority, so that responsibility lies with them. So that's probably a question for them. Yeah.
Just quickly about that, I've asked Tim as well with all the stuff we put in the bins that shouldn't be put in the bins to put a sample, like a bag together, and down the line councillors be able to go and take this bag and show people. It'd be everything, we shouldn't have put into the bins. So you physically have something to go and take to groups as well, because we need to physically show as well as tell. So that's another thing we're going to do.
I hope it's not the same bag that's going to follow us around for the next 2 years. But.
Yeah, but it will be. There'll be a clean pair of nappies in there.
Okay. Good to know. Councillor Julie Tucker.
I only have one question, really, and it relates to quite a few black areas in the Intelligently Green plan. And this seems to keep coming up where you've got a completed action. So, for example, if I look at IG 29, review all council-owned land and assess the suitability for natural habitat restoration, and then all we've got there is completed. We've got no way of knowing what the results of that have been. So that is my issue, really. And there's several in there. I think I've got about 7 or 8 of them.
What page are you on, Julie?
I'm on page 76.
So where we have previously said we have completed an action or a promise, we at the time when we were first reported we completed it, we would have said what we've done. If it's marked as completed, we then don't require any further updates on that, which is why it's blacked out. But at the time when we said, right, we've done that, the update would have said what we'd done.
And this is probably going back to where we don't have a previous one. So by the time, because this is only reported on every 6 months.
Yes.
And so for us to sort of be able to track back.
But if it's complete,
I don't remember seeing it.
I mean, I can't remember the specifics.
So,
if it's saying
this
it's
is
been
the problem.
completed, though, why would you need to go back? The time to ask those questions is when you're saying, right, we're saying we've now completed this. And if you're not happy with the explanation you're being given, then have the discussion then. I mean, perhaps in future I will hide those ones because there's nothing new to say.
If I can, Chair, if members are really concerned, you could have a chat to the responsible
Whoever
officer.
is,
Yeah, I know Liz. I've actually seen the piece of work that Liz has done, so I know she's done it. But yeah, I mean, you could always speak to Liz about that as well.
Yeah, well, it's not just Liz. It's
yeah, there's a
lots,
number there.
There's lots, and I suspect it's just because it is only every 6 months. I may well have mentioned it back then, but now, yeah, okay, thank you.
I think then there needs to be an action. Either we decide that we hide it, or if we were to keep it in there, then I think the narrative when it was completed could still remain. I don't know why we need to blank it out if it's completed and there's a narrative to say that this is why it has been completed. then surely we could just keep that narrative there. But the easier option just seems to remove it. Yeah. Any other questions? Councillor Googe.
One relatively minor point on the content of the report, and then another question. But the first one, on page 36, Revitalising Town Centres, items SM 31, 32 and 33, which are the proportion of vacant commercial units in the towns, we've got in there good performances, maximise. I'm pretty sure that should actually be minimise. Otherwise, not unless you deliberately want to turn them into a commercial wasteland. I don't know. It might be worth. Those are the ones that I spotted, but it just might occur to me that you might want to just spend a little time going through all of those and making sure that they're all correct. If there's a couple that have found their way through. And the other one, page 32. Sorry, let me just find it. This is, as Charlie says, it can be difficult zooming backs and forwards between different bits. Where are we? Page 32, yeah. B924, drive investments in the key sites identified in the town centre prospectuses. I mean, I know these are all the big issue things, including Riverside Centre in Evesham and whatever. Are we really confident that those are on target?
Through you, Chair, so the consultation on the Lido, which is that one about the second bullet point there, that is currently being undertaken and it's been really positively received in terms of the Riverside.
In terms of the Riverside, I can't really add to what it says there. Discussions are ongoing, so at this stage we're saying we're confident we can, we can deliver what we've promised, but as I say, discussions are ongoing.
On the 4-year plan, because it's still a 4-year.
Yeah, 31st of March 2028.
I'm sorry, Mark, I forgot, I didn't hear what you said. Which page, where were you on that one?
Page 32, item B924. Top one. There's only 2 items on that page.
Yeah. Yeah. My understanding is with the green, amber and red, it's up to the officer in charge of it to rate it, isn't it? You don't do it.
I sometimes do it.
You sometimes, but you'd be led.
So the idea is the officer doing the update does the rating.
Yeah.
Sometimes they miss doing it. Sometimes, probably not on the promises, and particularly not at this stage. I'd be unlikely to change any of those. But sometimes, you have a look and go, no, come on, that's not green. That's actually getting worse. But in terms of the promises, it's very much the lead officer, and particularly at this stage in our strategy. If that, the rating is looking at where does this promise end, when's the deadline, and where we are right now with the deadline being 4 years away, what's our best assessment of where we're going to be when we get to those 4 years. Now, as time goes on, I would definitely expect some of those greens to turn amber. I know 1 or 2 might go red. But at this stage, if we were sort of saying, well, we've had a promise for 6 months, and actually we think there's no chance we're going to achieve it, we've got something wrong somewhere, I would say.
I think it's probably just a case of tomato and tomato, but I think we'll stick with what it is at the moment. But I think, there's maybe as we go along, that's something we can start to consider a bit more in detail. But yeah, I think I do think it's a valid point that Councillor Goodge has raised. Any other questions? Councillor Crump, you've got one final question. Go on.
I was trying to do my homework. On the planning and infrastructure, it said, as the chart below shows, there has been a consistent reduction in the number of planning applications we've received over the last 12 months. The number of enforcement cases increased, and the number of building regulations applications has remained fairly consistent. Question: the number of applications may be reducing, but are the applications being submitted by developers with more than one development, i.e. less applications but more complicated and more houses?
Okay, so I have a response from Kieran Power. I think the short answer to your question is yes. but he's given me a slightly more detailed one, and I won't read all the detail, I'll share it with Spencer and then he can circulate it to you all. But what he's essentially saying is, while the overall number received has decreased both nationally and locally, the complexity of the planning process has significantly increased due to a number of factors, including policy uncertainty, speculative development. So developers here are now focusing on fewer larger projects to maximise returns. Other things like affordable housing trends, biodiversity net gains, etc. And these trends show a focus by developers and housing providers on larger, more complex projects. So many applications may have multiple phases or significant developments with infrastructure and other considerations, and they often require extensive consultation and negotiation, so sort of adding to workloads. It says the increased emphasis on larger developments aligns with market trends and the challenges of meeting housing delivery targets. Developers are working to maximise land use, particularly in areas with high housing demand. And as a result, while there are fewer applications overall, those submitted are more complex and require more intricate planning assessments. And planning service continues to try and adapt to these evolving challenges, making sure it's putting expertise and resources in the right places. So I think you've summarised it pretty well. And then he's gone on to explain sort of some of the more complex factors behind that.
So actually the figure's saying when the applications are reducing, they are, but they're not, basically. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the challenges when you're just looking at a single figure in isolation. It's telling you something, but it's only giving you part of the picture. And you can never get the whole picture on it, everything. But what we can try and encourage officers to do is without putting too much, explain a bit of what's going on underneath in the commentary. So it might look like demand is reducing, but actually they're more complex applications. So the workload is increasing or is essentially the same.
Yeah, because my thought from that was from the planning's departments, because I know from a board level what's going on as well, but it's not being very fair to them, because it's showing, it looks as if, well, actually we've got less work coming in, but they actually haven't. So it's sort of to help them and make it more sort of explanations for the level of work that they are doing and the complexities.
I mean, to that point, I had a meeting with Ian MacLeod a few weeks ago. He gave a really good report that he shared with me to Malvern about sort of the planning department, the sort of changes that have been made and the performance. And it seems that ONS there do look a bit more of that in detail. I'm not suggesting that we do that here, but I have asked that he come forward and give us a similar presentation, because a number of changes have happened in that department, and you know, it seems very much so for the positive. And I've spoken with Spencer, so we're looking to get that programmed in, hopefully this council year if we can. But yeah, I think that's the point of this report now, to see some of that stuff coming through, which you wouldn't have seen before as success. And that's a really good question from you, Councillor Crump, that's pulled out that information. So I think that's good. Is there any other questions on this particular bit? No? Thank you, Cherry. Thanks for everything you've done with that. Moving on to item 7, we've got the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee update, which has been kindly provided by Councillor Hartley. That's for noting. If you have any questions, then please direct those to Councillor Hartley. And just to give our thanks for him to attend those meetings and provide a comprehensive written update. That's very helpful. Item 7 still is then just a brief update on the Budget Scrutiny Group for this financial year. Councillor Tucker.
Yes, the Budget Scrutiny Committee has met 3 times. An initial meeting to look at terms of reference and the previous budget scrutiny review for 23-24 and the overall budget position introduction. And then the second meeting was for us to consider the the area of the budget relating to people. And last night we met and looked at the area relating to environment. Our next meeting will be on the 19th of December, and we will be looking at place.
Can I just ask, in terms of the changes that we made with budget scrutiny, do we feel that those have been effective and helpful for the process?
I think those people who are new to budget scrutiny seem to be picking things up quicker probably than they would have done previously.
Okay, and does it feel like it's useful to you, Jane, and your team?
Yes, Chair, so we had individual sessions with some of the new members, and then one sort of very small group session, but it does seem to be, and the questions are coming in thick and fast so far, yeah.
Okay.
Councillor Hardman was there as well last night, and Councillor Powell's been attending the meetings
Good.
as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Then we've got our work plan. Any comments on the work plan? So just to highlight, we've got platform housing coming to the meeting in January. Spencer's asked again for questions on that. Can you please make sure, I think you've got a tight deadline on that, haven't you? You asked for the end of this week? Or 12th of December. So if you can, please submit those. Having these people come in is only as useful if we're going to ask them some pertinent questions. So please do that. So no comment on the work plan. Councillor Tucker.
Just briefly, you and I have had discussions about the possibility of doing a task and finish group on Severn Trent, and I think to bring some information on that to the 15th of January meeting would be useful terms of reference and perhaps for discussion as to how best to go forward.
Yeah, I think so. We've met with Ian McLeod. I think he did say he would relay that conversation back to you and Spencer. So it would. Sorry, when I say you, I mean Jane. And maybe we could look to just get a Teams call in or something in the next couple of weeks, just to pick up on that. I think we did come out with a clear direction, and Ian's points were, they were noted. But I do think that there's something that we could do that would actually be a good piece of work for the council and just in general. So yeah, okay. Then the executive forward plan. Any questions or comments on that? No? Okay. And then date of future meeting, which is Wednesday, the 15th of January. And I would just like to say Merry Christmas to you all. Happy New Year. Here's to 2025. Thank you very much. I'll call the meeting closed.